Change your heart, change your life, change the planet.
Hey everybody, it's Tim Van Orden coming to you from the old stage road in Woodford, Vermont. I'm running up the mountain, my first mountain run since early June. I've been in Sweden for the past month in the southern part, Skåne, which is pretty flat. So my training has been dramatically different. And I want to relate that to goals that I set for myself earlier this year and how I'm approaching those goals and my own identity in a very different way than I would have in the past. One of the big races on my calendar this year has been the Escarpment Trail Run. It's one of the toughest races in the East, 18 miles long, climbing 3 peaks in the Catskills of New York, which are super steep. There's a lot of it, especially going up Blackhead Mountain. It's got to be 55-60% slope, no exaggeration. Like you're grabbing onto roots of trees to pull yourself up rock faces and then jumping down rock faces that are really steep on the way down. It's brutal. And I've avoided that race for the past 12 years because it's so dangerous. And last year the race director talked me into it because I had turned 50 and he wanted to see if I could challenge the record for 50-year-olds. But I had been injured and I wasn't really training much and didn't want to show up and get destroyed by a race of that magnitude because it's just a brutal race. Anyways, I went and I really exceeded my own expectations and everybody else's. I beat the 50-year-old record by 6 minutes and I was on pace for sub 3 hours, which to break 3 hours at Escarpment is quite an accomplishment. It's usually 1 or 2 people a year will do it, but nobody over 50. So I now have the record at 3 hours and 7 minutes and something, but the last 4 miles of the race I really fell apart. Anyway, so after that I was thinking, man, if I show up to this race in shape this year, I'm going under 3 hours because I was not even close to being in shape. So I've really been building and building and building with that race on the horizon. And in April, I was in just phenomenal shape after an incredible year of snowshoe training, and I was killing it, winning a lot of races outright. And then I got hurt. I tripped and fell in a race and sprained my ankle, tore my arm open, dislocated my shoulder. And that kind of really set me back. And I'm good at zooming out and readjusting and never really having a goal be a destination, but more like a lighthouse, something that's guiding me, something that's helping me engage in a certain level of training. And gets me excited. It's a fun thing on the horizon. And I had the US Trail Championships half marathon in early June, and I was coming off injury for that, so that was the other big race for the year. Didn't go well, but maybe I can bounce back and really kill it at Escarpment. But then I go to Sweden and I'm running on flat ground, mostly around the city, and I just had to let that be what it was and enjoy it rather than thinking, oh man, I'm blowing it, I'm not gonna break 3 hours at Escarpment. And remind myself that even if I do, who cares? And that's a fun thing to imagine. It's a fun idea to play around with. But that's all it is. It's just an idea. And there's a writer, Anne Patchett, and she says that when she comes up with an idea, it's this beautiful, brilliant butterfly. and that the first thing she has to do when putting pen to paper is to kill the butterfly and pin it to the page. And in doing so, it loses most of its beauty. But that's the only way to write about it. You've got to take it out of the abstract. Be willing to kill the idea so that something can live in the real world. So that's something that I practice with my writing and even making videos and my racing, most importantly. So one of the ways that I do that in relation to racing is to put myself into races knowing that I'm not prepared. And I do this because I want to see what my reality is. I want to see what that butterfly actually looks like and feels like on the page, not just in my head. So it's fun to imagine yourself breaking a record, crossing the finish line in first place, whatever the goal is, whatever the dream is. But you've got to measure yourself. You've got to find out what's real. So while I was in Sweden, there's a pretty big trail race there, the Yanarp IF trail, they call it, or gift. And there's a 55K and a 27K. The 55K is the Swedish National Championships, but the 27K gets a very competitive crowd. And I have no idea what Swedish trail running is like, so I signed up. It's a long race, close to 18 miles. So similar to Escarpment in length, not the same elevation. Maybe we climbed 1,600 feet. So maybe 20% of Escarpment. And I went for it, knowing that I wasn't really trained for that. And I did very, very well for 18K, and then fell apart in a remainder. But that was my goal. My goal is to find out what I'm made of, to take the butterfly, snatch it, and smash it onto the page. Not that I would do that to an actual butterfly, but that's what this writer says. I need to find out where I break. I need to find out where my image is purely fantasy and where I actually have the ability to perform at a certain level for a certain distance. And right now it's not 27K or 30K. And while I did very, very well in that race in Sweden, I got second and crushed it as far as 50-year-olds. I think I set a course record for 50 plus. But it let me know what I have to work with and work on. So that was a week ago. And it was a tough recovery. I was really beat up. I haven't done any fast running in probably 3.5, 4 weeks leading up to that. And it was a lot of fast running. So yesterday, not even fully recovered from the race in Sweden, I entered the Exterra French River Trail Run, which is a half marathon, a little bit shorter, but really technical. Not huge climbs, but lots of little steep, annoying climbs that just keep showing up, one after the other, up and down. And knowing that I wasn't recovered from Sweden, knowing that I had traveled for 26 hours straight, getting from Sweden back to Vermont, didn't sleep for 26 hours. Well, actually longer than that, because I was up before I went to the airport in Copenhagen, and I was up when I got home. So it's probably up for 34 hours. And a lot of that was just relentless travel, which can be exhausting. And that was just a day away from this race yesterday. And the time zone thing. my sleep is all screwed up. So I went into yesterday not with any expectations, not with any goals, just simply to see again where I break, where I fall apart, and yet to run as if I'm not going to break. Because if you go easy, you don't know where you're going to fall apart in an actual race. So you have to race it. You have to run as if you're not going to fall apart. So create race conditions, even though you're at 60, 70% of your capacity, whatever. Race as if you're at 100. And I went out hard behind another guy. He took it out at 5:30 pace, which for a trail race is smoking. And he only held that for like a kilometer. And then he slowed down and I passed him. And I just went for it. I raced it. And like 10K into a half marathon, I was feeling it. And it became a mental race from that point forward. I don't want to use the word willing, because I wasn't willing my body. I was exploring my body. I was exploring different gears. I was exploring different strides and different postures and finding different ways to be efficient, working with different styles of breathing, hyperventilating on every uphill and over the top to clear as much carbon dioxide as possible, which prevents there from being too many hydrogen ions in the blood, in the muscle, because it's the hydrogen ions that lead to muscle fatigue. Anyway, doing all kinds of experimentation to keep a body moving at a good clip when it doesn't want to, when it's saying, ooh, you're done way back there and you have miles to go. To find innovative ways to explore in the midst of the voices of quit, and to explore in the midst of a body that keeps trying to shut down on you. And I ended up winning the race in a good time and managed to hold decent speed. I couldn't hold top speed, but I held 80 to 85%. And I don't care about the win. That's just a testament to what you can do through mental exploration of your body. That's the value there. But to me, it wasn't about placement. It's just useful to show other people what you can do with your mind. What it was a classroom of what I'm likely to feel and have to deal with at Escarpment. Because last year at Escarpment, I fell apart with 4 miles to go and really, really struggled and slowed down by maybe 3 minutes per mile. So it's really important as an athlete, but also just dealing with any type of goal, dealing with any type of challenge. It's really important to put yourself into a situation where you're going to fail. It's pretty much guaranteed, or at least parts of you are going to fail. And then to work with yourself, get comfortable with yourself, not be afraid of that situation, or not be afraid of the feeling in your body, or feelings, the intensity of those feelings, but to learn how to move around inside of them, take inventory of them, and experiment. But if you never allow yourself to go past that limit, you never get to learn how to deal with it when you get there. So if you keep it as a butterfly, if you keep it as this perfect image, and never smash it onto the page and see what's in its gut, see what it's made of, it's going to remain a fantasy to you. And maybe you'll get into the race or whatever the event is, and the moment those feelings start showing up, the moment that you realize, holy cow, I can't sustain this pace, I don't know if I can make it to the finish line, and my dreams of victory or breaking records have just vanished, it's so easy to fall apart mentally in those moments and quit. And I know a lot of runners that do this. Really, really good runners that didn't test themselves enough. And when their body started to fail, their mind just went off a cliff. And they walk out of the race, they quit. And it's a shame, because if they had gotten used to being in that place, they could have found a number of different ways to keep going at a slightly slower pace. I'm not going to maintain top speed, but we'll find a way to go 85%. It's doable, but you'll never get there unless you put yourself there in practice. So a lot of the races I do are about that training of being in the trenches. It's like a flight simulator for a pilot. Okay, we're going to simulate crashing, and you're going to have to figure out how to land this plane with no engines or a damaged wing that wants to torque the plane in a particular direction. They've got to practice that over and over again. You don't want a pilot that hasn't practiced how to fly a plane that's failing and falling apart. And as an athlete, you want to practice in the midst of a body that's failing and falling apart. Now, I'm not talking about physical injury. I'm just talking about exhaustion. You've got to learn how to deal with that. So anybody that wants to really get to the next level in anything they do, you've got to practice killing the butterfly. You got to let go of the fantasy as a fantasy and put it into the real world to see how it measures up to the real world. Not, as most people do, see how the real world measures up to their fantasy. Because when the real world doesn't measure up to their fantasy, they say, well, screw the world. I'd rather live in my fantasy. And this is why we have so many arguments, political fights, relationships gone south, or people that get hurt, badly injured, or just go off into mental illness. Because when they bring their protected, precious fantasy or butterfly and they put it in the world, and the world beats the crap out of it, they take that butterfly back and they say, never again. I don't like this world. This world sucks. This world is wrong. My poor butterfly. No, the world is the world. Your butterfly is a fantasy. It's not real. Your ideologies are a fantasy. They're not real. You got to put them into conversation. Got to put them in the trenches. You got to put them in the midst of situations and environments that are going to break them. And you have to do that on purpose. That's how you get better at things. But it's not about beating yourself up. It's about learning how to be compassionate when you feel beaten up. Learning how to be gentle, not push. And that's why I didn't want to use the word willing my body, because that's not what I was doing. I was having a gentle conversation with my body, because the reality is that my physicality had tons of energy. It was just being really resource conservative because it was approaching certain thresholds and it got scared. But there's energy there, and you can gently, by just shifting around certain movements, certain breathing patterns, etc., you can have your body relax and the fear goes out and it'll start releasing some of that energy back to you. So that's a kind of a long description about what I've been up to and how I'm moving towards the escarpment race in 2 weeks. I don't know what to expect, but I do know this. I'm not in the shape that I hope to be in, and that's fine. That's my reality. What can I do in the next 2 weeks to build some more base, to maybe get 5% more prepared? In 2 weeks, that's about the best I'm going to do. Give myself another 5%. But more importantly, how can I mentally prepare for trying to break 3 hours and having a body that quits with, say, 2 miles to the finish line this time, what do I do mentally then? Am I ready for that? Because if I am, if I practiced in that space, I think I can still break 3 hours. But only if I'm prepared to face it now. If I'm not, it'll come as too much of a shock in the middle of the race. So that's what I'm up to. And right now I'm dealing with an arm and a shoulder that's failing because this camera is on a gimbal, which is heavy, and it's on an extension rod, which creates a leverage disadvantage. So total failure over here right now. But I'm learning how to relax and be gentle in the midst of that. But I'm gonna give it a rest, so I'll see you soon. Peace.